Hello, my name is Sharon Peterson, and I'm one of the dietitians at the Villages Health. I'd like to share with you a topic that I'm very passionate about, and it's entitled Muffin Tops, Sugar Bellies, and Chronic Inflammation. So the objectives of today's topic is to cover the importance of the inflammation process that naturally occurs in our body, to compare it to how it becomes chronic inflammation throughout the whole body and what the problem is with it being a chronic situation. Discuss how chronic inflammation is related to obesity, and to then finally determine if it is possible to reverse chronic inflammation. So what is inflammation? The word inflammation itself is a normal and important part of the body's defense system to ward off infections, toxins, and foreign substances. You see a picture here of a father and son, and they're putting a Band-Aid on his knee. So inflammation is valuable and important because it does tell our body, hey, something's wrong and we need to get some attention over here. So the classic symptoms of inflammation are redness, swelling, heat, and/or pain. The problem is when our immune system shifts into this chronic state of alarm and it becomes whole body chronic inflammation. That's when it starts to affect other disease states and organs. So chronic inflammation should be thought of like a smoldering fire. And it turns out it is associated with increased risk for many of our chronic diseases. This is a quote from a book that I really enjoy called Ultra Metabolism by Mark Hyman, great author. I own, I think, all of his books. And this quote says, inflammation is connected to every major health condition we face today. It is in large part responsible for heart disease, cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, arthritis, allergies, and autoimmune diseases. So that's a really powerful statement. When he says inflammation, he's talking about chronic inflammation. And look at all those different diseases that we may, not think of as having anything in common with each other. But actually, if we look at the parent being inflammation, and then how it comes out in a person's body in different ways in different chronic diseases. Here's an additional list of more chronic diseases that have been linked to chronic inflammation that were not stated in the previous quote. So the aging process, sinus problems, asthma, dementia, decreased immune function, irritable bowel syndrome, IBS, obesity, insulin resistance, and this thing called metabolic syndrome. Now, you may not be familiar with metabolic syndrome, so let's talk about that for a moment. Metabolic syndrome is a clustering of risk factors, these 5 risk factors, that start to stack up in the same person. So turns out we have metabolic syndrome if we have any 3 of these 5 symptoms. So let's look at them. Waist size, for women, more than 35 inches. For men, more than 40 inches. Number 2, triglycerides, fasting. If our triglycerides are 150 or higher, that's one of the risk factors. Number 3, third risk factor, HDL, too low, because HDLs are the good guys. HDLs are the ones we want to be high, as high as possible, because they are the ones that help us get cholesterol out of our system and out of our body. So in this case, an HDL in women lower than 50 or under 50, or an HDL in men under 40 is considered a risk factor. So the HDL being less than 50 in women, or HDL being less than 40 in men is another one of these risk factors. Number 4, blood pressure. Looking at the top number being above 130 or the bottom number being above 85. That is a risk factor. And then number 5, blood sugar. Of course, a fasting blood sugar above 110. So what this is indicating is that we have metabolic syndrome, which is, similar to or related to insulin resistance, if we have any 3 of these 5 features. So any 3 of the 5 means that we do have metabolic syndrome. Now, 25% of American adults have it and are walking around with it, probably don't know they have it. It can be screened for, and this is something we can determine for ourselves, especially if we have access to our labs and what our blood pressure's been doing. So, what causes chronic inflammation? Current understanding is that there are the top 5 causes. We're going to count these down from 5 to 1. So one of the 5 causes is food intolerances, like your gluten, your dairy, eggs, soy, peanuts. Those are some of the most common food intolerances. They actually, cause the body to become inflamed. A lot of people are finding that avoiding gluten is helping them feel better. And other people are allergic or intolerant to the other things listed here. Number 4, environmental toxins and infections, chemicals that show up in our water supply and the chemicals we use in cleaning, etc. Lack of physical activity is related to chronic inflammation. Stressful lifestyle kind of makes sense, right? Because if we're becoming stressed, it's kind of like sounding the alarm, kind of like that inflammation response. Now, can anyone guess the number 1 cause? Remembering what our topic is about today and the fact that I'm a registered dietitian, the number 1 cause of chronic inflammation turns out to be the standard American diet, which we like to refer to as SAD. So what is the standard American diet? How is that defined? Well, it's the foods in our standard American diet that are ultra processed, high sugar, high saturated fat, high salt, empty calorie junk foods. Another quote from that book that I referred to before by Mark Hyman, he says, in the US, we have an abundance of convenient, cheap, poor quality foods that lack nutrients, but are high in sugar, refined carbs, and saturated fats. So in case we're still confused about what we might be talking about, here's some pictures to help us understand. So how is this idea of chronic inflammation related to obesity? Well, these poor quality, low nutrient, ultra processed junk foods cause the cells in our body to get out of balance and stressed and not happy. So this triggers the body's fat cells to release inflammatory messages, sound the alarm, kind of like what we talked about in the normal inflammation process, except this becomes more chronic. So these inflammatory messages, this sound the alarm idea, they activate the body's stress response. You might remember learning in school about fight or flight. Fight or flight is a situation where our body is either ready to fight off an enemy or attacker, or to run away, flight, to run away. So fight or flight. So in order for us to have an immediate, quick source of energy, the body will respond by slowing down digestion, okay, increasing appetite, increasing stress hormones, decreasing fat burning, increasing insulin resistance, and causing weight gain over time. So these are all the things that we would not want our body to be doing. We don't want to be going in that direction, but when we're in a fight or flight situation, we have to shut down some of these systems so we can send energy to where it needs to be, for example, the skeletal muscles. So in a short-term burst of energy, this is a helpful thing. But again, when it becomes long-term and chronic, then you can see how this starts to fight against us. So how is inflammation related to obesity? So these fat cells in the midsection produce the stress hormones and those inflammatory messages that we talked about. So fat cells in the midsection are a big source of chronic inflammation. So I ask you, are fat cells part of the endocrine system or the immune system? Stress hormones come from the endocrine system. Inflammatory messages come from the immune system. What do you think? Well, while you're thinking about it, here's a picture, a cartoon of a fat cell. Remember, fat cells take their jobs very seriously. That pink stuff is the nucleus and all the other structures in the normal cell pushed over to the side because the fat cell wants all of its room to be able to store fat, which is the yellow stuff. So are fat cells part of the endocrine system or the immune system? The answer is both. In fact, fat cells are now considered their own endocrine organ. So what do these fat cells in the midsection remind us of? Think back to the title of this topic, of this presentation, muffin tops and sugar bellies. Fat cells in the midsection. And so when we see a body that looks like this, this would be an example of the muffin top and sugar belly. Back in the day, we might have referred to this as love handles and beer belly, but this is very different than that. Much more extreme, much more pronounced. So how is inflammation related to obesity? We continue to cover this topic. Turns out inflammation and obesity are intimately tied together in a vicious cycle, where increased inflammation causes increased weight gain, and increased weight gain causes increased inflammation. So around and around it goes. As the inflammation gets worse, the weight gain gets worse. As the weight gain gets worse, the inflammation gets worse. In fact, obesity is now estimated to take 9 years off the lifespan of the average American. So I ask you, is it possible that muffin tops and sugar bellies represented in these pictures are actually people who are malnourished? I hope that you are nodding yes, because we should be thinking of this situation as malnutrition. For a number of years, we've looked at someone like this and have made comments such as, wow, they get plenty to eat. Well, maybe in fact they get plenty of calories, but as we talked about, if they're living on these ultra-processed junk foods, the nutrients are not there, and so they're actually malnourished in addition to having excess weight. Can we reverse this idea of chronic inflammation? Another quote from the book, Ultra Metabolism: the treatment for inflammation is on your plate and in your shoes. Another quote: if we don't eat high quality, nutrient dense foods, we will become inflamed and fat. So the answer, as you've already guessed, is that changes in diet and lifestyle and physical activity can reverse chronic inflammation. How can we reverse it? Step one would be to eliminate the foods that causes the inflammation. So remember, these ultra processed, high sugar, high saturated fat, low nutrient, refined, empty junk foods. A quote from the book: processed and refined carbs slow down metabolism and contribute to aging, diabetes, heart disease, dementia, and cancer. Again, a number of chronic diseases that we typically may not think are related. In this case, if we consider inflammation the starting point, then they are related in that they are coming out in different ways in different people as a result of the inflammation. This is interesting. There was a research study that had compared, a fast food meal to fruits and vegetables, but the key is the calories were the same. So the calories from a fast food meal created more inflammation and oxidative stress in the participants' bodies than the same amount of calories from fruits and vegetables. So you have to realize here that they have the same amount of calories, so it wasn't a calorie difference that caused the inflammation. It had to be the component of the foods itself. And they were able to show that there was more inflammation created from the fast food meal as compared to the fruits and vegetables. So as we continue to talk about step one, eliminating foods that cause inflammation, shifting from refined carbs to healthier carbs like vegetables, legumes, whole grains, whole fruits, would lead to a dramatic reduction in obesity and all diseases of aging. However, the food industry spends over $30 billion per year in advertising to convince us to buy these refined junk foods: cookies, chips, donuts, pastries, snack cakes, fast food, soda, and candy. So step two would then be choose the foods that reduce inflammation. And there are a number of foods out there that reduce inflammation. Here's the list. We need to look for nutrient-dense whole foods, such as whole fruits, fresh and frozen vegetables, higher fiber whole grains, nuts and seeds, legumes, beans, chicken, turkey, fish, seafood, eggs, lower fat dairy products, olive oil, tea, dark chocolate, garlic, herbs and spices, small amounts of lean beef and pork, and red wine in moderation. Seeing that list, you might recognize this as a certain style of eating that's very popular and in all the magazines. And I'm wondering if you recognize this eating style. What eating style does this remind us of? I gave you a clue. I had a word, two words bolded and italicized. Hopefully it reminds us of the Mediterranean diet or the Mediterranean style of eating. So much information. So it's such a strong research-based approach. And also, you may have also heard of the DASH diet. DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. It's now being used for dementia and heart health and weight management and reducing inflammation. They both are nutrient-dense, healthy styles of eating, and there's tons of information on the internet if you want to look into either one of them in more detail. So I want to show you this. It's called the color wheel of foods. You see in the middle, it talks about antioxidants and preventing some of those chronic diseases that we talked about. But as I click on this, it fills in, and I want you to think about what you see here. Certainly we see lots of different colors, right? We see the colors of the rainbow. Hopefully you're starting to notice that it's fruits and vegetables that are in this color wheel of foods. And this should remind us that there are a number, so many wonderful phytochemicals or plant-based chemicals in foods that are health promoting, and each of the colors represent different phytochemicals. And so when we're talking about reducing inflammation, we're also talking about trying to eat a variety of colorful foods, especially fruits and vegetables. So we're still talking about choosing foods that decrease inflammation. These statements are from a different book that I really like called Food Rules: An Eater's Manual by Michael Pollan. So he challenges us to think about, is this a real food? Is it fresh? Is it in its natural state? I actually don't believe the statement, all foods can fit. I like to say all real foods can fit. Here's one. Would my great-grandmother recognize this as food? Can you imagine if our great-grandmothers went to a grocery store today? I think they'd be confused. I think they'd be shocked. I think they would have all kinds of questions about what in the world are these things in this grocery store. This is a fun one. Ask ourselves, did this food ever have a root or a mother? A root means plant, and a mother means, it was alive at one time, right? Does this food ever have a root or a mother? And one of my favorite ones is, let's eat in harmony with our genes so we can fit into our genes. So there are many anti-inflammatory herbs and spices. The one you probably are aware of is curcumin. It's turmeric. So curcumin is an anti-inflammatory phytochemical. It has been shown to be beneficial for arthritis, heart disease, autoimmune diseases. Turmeric contains this phytochemical curcumin. And so if you enjoy foods with curry in it, that's actually what you're eating is turmeric, or the phytochemical curcumin. Other anti-inflammatory herbs and spices: rosemary, thyme, garlic, cilantro, oregano, ginger, cayenne pepper, fennel, green tea. So let's review. Why is the inflammation process, the basic inflammation process, important? Hopefully you realize that we need that in order to survive. We need to know if we have injured ourselves, or if there's an infection or a toxin in our body. We need to be able to understand that something's wrong. But chronic inflammation is when this natural short-term process becomes long-term and then starts causing problems and causing damage, because we're in this constantly, fight or flight state. How is chronic inflammation related to obesity and chronic diseases? We talked about that. The inflammation, the chronic inflammation, as it continues, it causes the fat cells to release these signals and to be stressed out and unhappy, and trying to get our attention, actually trying to get us to do something different. And then eventually chronic diseases start to develop from this process. What are 2 strategies to reverse chronic inflammation in the body? Well, one was to eliminate the foods that cause inflammation. Hopefully you're clear on what those are. And to choose foods that decrease inflammation. And I hope that you're clear on which foods those are as well. Thank you for for listening and being involved today with this seminar. And I hope that you heard something that is interesting and useful for you to incorporate into your lifestyle. Once again, I'm Sharon Peterson. I'm one of the dietitians with the Villages Health. My email is sharon.peterson@thevillageshealth.com. And I'd love to hear from you.